Basing itself on the 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons rule set, Baldur's Gate 3 is going to have characters making a lot of spell-based decisions. But the little blurb-like descriptions that they provide don't always give you the whole story on how the spell works and how it interacts with the rule set. Here I've gone through all the level 1 spells for divine spellcasters. That means it's given to the base class of Druid, Cleric, and Ranger. It might be on other spell lists, but this makes it a divine spell in this case. I'm going to talk about how useful I find them to be and put them on a loose tier system based on my experience. When we take a look at the other spell lists they're on, such as spells that overlap with arcane, they may appear in different tiers there because we're comparing them to the other options you have as that caster. I'm bound to come to some final thoughts that are very different from how others think. Just remember, you can chat about it in the comments or you can just ignore this list altogether, but this is how useful I found these spells to be, or not to be, in my playthroughs. So with this little bit of an intro out of the way, let's just get into it. Up first is Animal Friendship, and honestly there's not a whole lot to say about it. It's pretty much Charm Person, but for animals, specifically beasts with an intelligence score lower than 4. Now what it means to be charmed is that they're particularly fond of you, the caster, and they won't attack you, the caster. They'll still attack your allies, and they are not under your control. You can use this to get particular dialogue outcomes, as you'll get advantage on the charisma checks necessary for them against the target, but there's not much use beyond that. I make it a C tier, I barely ever use it. Now we're talking about the Cleric exclusive spell Bane. Bane requires concentration and can last up to 10 rounds while you hold that concentration. It's an enemy debuff version of a much better ally buff spell called Bless, but we'll get there later. You can target up to 3 enemies with Bane, or 4 if you upcast it with a level 2 spell slot. And any of those enemies who fail their charisma saving throw will receive a 1d4 penalty to all attack rolls and saving throws, which is actually a pretty good effect. The only thing holding it back is that this is what we call save and suck, which means if the enemy makes their saving throw, absolutely nothing happens. So be sure to cast it on as many targets as you possibly can. I call this a B tier spell because while it's a really good effect, it's held back by the saving throw aspect. Up next we have another Cleric exclusive with Bless. This is a party buff spell that can target up to 3 allies with a first level spell slot or up to 4 with a second level spell slot, and everyone within range of the spell gets plus 1d4 to all attack rolls and saving throws. This is obviously better than hoping your enemies fail their saving throw because you just get the bonus. On top of that, when you consider your average ability score of your characters and the average defenses of most of the enemies in the game, plus 1d4 is somewhere between no bonus and advantage, so kind of like half advantage in that case. This is an S tier spell. If my cleric can hold concentration, I put it up and keep it on. Druids and Trickery Domain Clerics will get Charm Person. Inflict the charm condition for 10 rounds with no need for concentration. That means they won't attack you, but they can still attack your allies, and you'll have advantage on charisma checks versus them. Use it to explore all the dialogue options and not much else. It's a C tier spell. Command is a cleric spell that commands your target to halt or just not take their next turn. You can do it to 2 targets if you upcast with a second level spell slot. Now if they make their wisdom saving throw, absolutely nothing happens. It's a save or suck spell. However, completely missing 1 turn is actually a really good effect, especially if they have particularly devastating spells or multi-attack. So because the effect is so good, I consider this an A tier spell. Create and Destroy Water is a spell for all clerics and druids. It summons a little area of rainfall that creates a puddle-like surface effect. While you're on the surface effect, you have the wet condition, which means you're resistant to fire, unable to become set on fire, but you're also vulnerable to lightning and cold damage. In addition to this vulnerability, targeting the area with a lightning effect turns it into an area of effect lightning damage spell. And cold spells such as Ray of Frost can freeze the entire area, forcing creatures to make an acrobatics check or fall prone. You can also use Create Water to destroy fire, or you can use the Destroy Water portion to destroy surfaces such as this. Combined with other effects, it can be pretty useful, but you need initiative in your favor and you're using more than 1 turn for these effects, so I'm only going to put this as B tier. Cure Wounds, once the quintessential healing spell of clerics and druids, now playing second banana to Healing Word. Just cast Healing Word, though you may have other uses for your bonus action, so let's put this as B tier. We've got our first ranger exclusive with Ensnaring Strike, and it's alright. You cast it as either a melee or a ranged attack, and the target initially takes the weapon's damage as usual, and then they gotta make a strength saving throw or become ensnared in vines and roots when they fail. They not only keep them from moving, but they cause 1d6 piercing damage at the start of each subsequent turn. Now it sounds great, but you might want to note that there are 2 lines of defense for the target. First you gotta hit them, and then after you hit them they have to fail a strength saving throw. But odds are you were going to be attacking them anyway, so this is just some icing on the cake at the cost of one of your spell slots, which as long as you're holding on to at least one, 1, you're not using them for much else. And strength saving throws, targets are usually very good at them. I think this is a solid A tier spell. I use it pretty often. The Druid exclusive Entangle is up next. As far as crowd control goes, it's a pretty solid choice. The area where you cast it gets covered in twisting vines and roots, and creatures within the area have to make a strength saving throw or become restrained. Now, a creature that's unhindered by it can use their help action to break them free, but as long as you hold concentration, that area remains that way for up to 10 rounds, imposing difficult terrain in addition to these saving throws. And did I mention it's flammable? If I think I can hold concentration, I'm going to use this spell somewhere, but I'm going to throw it into A tier because it's somewhat situational as opposed to being like a universally good spell. You'll gain access to Faerie Fire if you're a Druid or a light domain Cleric. It's an area of effect spell where the targets within have to make a dexterity saving throw or suffer the effects. So it is save or suck, but it's a really good effect. Any target that fails its dexterity saving throw will have attacks against it all have advantage. Every attack, not the next attack, not the first attack from your character, all attacks, as long as you're holding concentration. And there's no limit to the number of creatures that are affected by it, just the finite area that it takes up. So the effect is good enough to overcome the save or suck aspect of it. You do need to be careful though because there is friendly fire, but I still put this as A tier because I cast the spell quite often. As far as divine casters go, Rangers and Druids get access to Fog Cloud, and it's a pretty interesting one. It will heavily obscure the area and blind anyone within it. Being blinded isn't so bad because you can just leave the area and you'll be fine. Heavily obscured will make you pretty much immune to being directly targeted by ranged attacks. It doesn't stop you from being targeted by grease and other area of effect spells though. So while you don't need to worry about taking direct damage, the caster can easily have their concentration broken and end the spell. However, while it's up, you can hide within it and really cheese some fights by just popping out, taking a few shots, and popping back in. Still, I feel like you can end most battles more quickly if you just play to your character's strengths, but it does have its uses, so it's a pretty solid B tier spell for me. Druids and Rangers get Goodberry, and it's not a very good spell. Not very good. When you cast a spell, you create some berries. They stay in your inventory until you perform a long rest, and they can be consumed for a bonus action to regain 1d4 hit points. They also count as 1 camping supply toward your long rest supply goal of 40, which is going to increase as you level up. The spell's C tier. Skip it. Sorry. A much better spell than Goodberry is Guiding Bolt. Base class wise, it's Cleric exclusive. You make a ranged attack against your target and you can deal 4 or 5d6 if you upcast it, radiant damage, which is rarely ever resisted. So it makes it a pretty solid choice for damage type. And on top of that, the next attack against that same target will have advantage. If you can get high ground to get a decent bonus to your attack initially and come closer to guaranteeing that this hits, not only will it deal a lot of damage and possibly kill the target, but it'll make sure that the next attack against it probably does kill it. This spell's S tier for me. I love it. I cast it quite often. Hail of Thorns is another ranger spell that affects your weapon attack. If you do a ranged attack with Hail of Thorns, you're going to be doing an additional 1d10 damage to everyone within 2 meters of your target, including the original target. They'll make a dexterity saving throw, taking only half damage if they succeed. This is A tier for ranger spells. If you're going to attack anyway and there's people close by, go for it. Healing Word, the healing spell that can be cast from a distance for a bonus action. Don't bother healing mid-combat, it's not very effective. Use this to bring up downed allies. But you're going to be using it so often, and it's so indispensable, this is S tier material. Hunter's Mark is a ranger exclusive spell and it's a pretty big deal. You cast it as a bonus action on a target, and from that point on, as long as you hold concentration, all your weapon attacks deal an additional 1d6 weapon damage to them. And if they die, go ahead and cast it on somebody else. No extra spell slot needed, just another bonus action. You can do this indefinitely for as long as you hold concentration or until you finish a long rest and get the spell slot back anyway. This is S tier for ranger spells. This is what makes the ranger a ranger. We've got Inflict Wounds next, and as far as dealing damage, it's a pretty good spell. But overall, I don't use it that often. I don't think it's very useful. You need to be in melee to do it, and I want to be holding concentration with my Cleric a lot, so I don't want them in the fray getting whacked and losing Bless or losing Faerie Fire. So while it could be 6d10 on a crit and necrotic damage is rarely resisted, I think all things considered, it's really not as great a spell as people think it is. I'd skip it and hold on to the better options you have as a Cleric. This is a B tier for me. Base class Druids and Rangers get jump, which multiplies your jump distance by 3. This is really good on a character with high strength already, but its usefulness doesn't really extend into combat too much except for positioning. It's easy enough to get the high ground without it. I just don't think it's as useful as a lot of people say it is. I make it C tier, I don't even bother with it unless I'm exploring. All the arguments I've seen for Longstrider being a useful spell involve extremely specific scenarios. It just doesn't seem that useful to me in general. You'll increase your movement speed by 3 meters. I rarely think to myself, I wish I could move a little further on this turn. And even more rarely do I think, I wish I could have spent a spell slot so that I can move more on this turn. This is a C tier spell for me. It's just not that great. Lunar Mend isn't exactly a spell per se, but it does use a spell slot for its effect. It's exclusive to Circle of the Moon Druids, and you regain 1d8 hit points per level of spell slot expended to use it. At face value, that's not that great, but when you think about it, if you're going to go beast form, you're not going to use those spell slots for much else. And this frees your Cleric up to do other things because they're not spending spell slots healing you. This is solid B tier, you'll use it when you have to, but it's not fantastic. Let's take a look at Protection from Good and Evil. The spell lasts forever, or until you lose concentration or take a long rest, so almost forever, close enough. Now aberrations, celestials, elementals, fae, fiends, and undead are unable to frighten, possess, or charm you, but more importantly, they will always have disadvantage on their attack rolls against you. Circumstantial, yes. Useful, also yes. Cast this on whoever's tanking you for the crypt fight or anti-ethel. Solid B tier, pretty close to A, but let's play it safe and make it B. I'm usually holding concentration on other things as my Cleric. Up next is Shield of Faith. It's a Cleric-only spell, and it gives your target an additional +2 to their armor class. This is another concentration spell that potentially lasts all day until you take a long rest. It's more universally useful than Protection from Good and Evil, but if concentration breaks, you don't really get your money's worth. So while the +2 is really pretty good, the concentration aspect drops it to B tier for me. Another concentration spell that can last all day or until you take a long rest is the Druid and Ranger spell Speak with Animals that lets you... Anyone? Speak with animals. Okay, so speaking with animals is pretty cool and pretty cute and pretty awesome and sometimes useful, but you know what else druids get? Wild Shape. And you can talk to animals while you're in Wild Shape. Now, yes, you get different dialogue options, but in addition to that, there's tons of Speak with Animal potions lying around in early access, and they don't require concentration, and they still last all day. So this spell is C tier. I would put it lower if I could, just forget they even have it. Closing out our divine spell list is the Druid spell Thunderwave. You blast a thunderous shockwave outward in front of you and kind of to the sides, and a successful Constitution saving throw grants your target the benefit of only taking half damage and the privilege of staying where they stand. Failing the save inflicts the full 2d8 thunder damage, unless it's upcast for 3d8, and blows them back quite a bit. Verticality in Baldur's Gate 3 makes this very useful. The necessity to be in melee and the near guarantee that you're going to hit targets you don't want to hit makes it not so useful. It could be B plus-ish, close to A, but I'm comfortable with B. And there we have it. There's my tier list for Baldur's Gate 3 early access spells, at least the level 1 divine spells. I'm sure many of you disagree with some of the things I've said, so let's go ahead and chat about it. And I plan on doing more content like this in the future. So if you got anything out of this video, consider giving it a like, consider giving me a subscribe, whatever, all this YouTube love that, YouTube values so much for us. I appreciate you sticking to the end. Take care, and I'll see you in the next one.